My name is Eleanor, I'm 74 years old, and I just did something no quiet grandmother was ever supposed to do. I sold my own house out from under my son and his wife. I had been gone only a week, tending to a sick church friend, when I returned to find my belongings shoved aside and my daughter-in-law's parents stretched out on my couch like they owned the place. When I protested, she sneered, "One word from you and you'll never hold your grandson again." That was the moment I dialed my lawyer, and even he admitted he'd never seen a move this bold. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you watching from today? Comment below. It wasn't always like this. The mornings in this house used to be my comfort. I'd wake before the sun fully pushed through the blinds, and the first thing I'd do was put the kettle on. That hiss of boiling water was my anchor. I'd wrap my hands around a warm cup of tea, breathing in the steam as the light crept across the kitchen tiles. Sometimes, if I closed my eyes, I could almost hear my husband humming the hymn he used to sing while buttering his toast. "This house is our safe place, Ellie," he would always tell me. And for decades I believed him. My days were simple and I liked them that way. I'd spend a little time in the garden, tending to the roses that my son once helped me plant when he was 10 years old. Back then he would race out the door barefoot, press his small hands into the soil and say, "These will grow as strong as you, Mom." The smell of earth and roses still carried me back to those moments. But now, when I bent down to prune the branches, the silence pressed in on me heavier than the soil in my hands. Inside, I'd set the table for one. My late husband's chair stayed in its place, though no one had sat in it for nearly 15 years. I couldn't bring myself to move it. That empty chair was my companion, as strange as that may sound. Some mornings I would look at it and whisper, "You'd know what to do, wouldn't you?" And in the quiet, I imagined his steady voice answering back. I tried to stay busy, baking a pie for the church bake sale, knitting for the women's circle, even helping out at the library on Tuesdays. But no matter how much I filled the hours, there was an ache that never quite went away. My son used to call every Sunday, but lately those calls had grown shorter, more distracted. His wife's voice sometimes echoed faintly in the background, sharp and impatient. I told myself he was just busy. Work, family life. That's what happens when children grow. But still, when I set the kettle on the stove, I would glance at the phone, half hoping it would ring. Half hoping his voice would say, "Hey Mom, just wanted to hear you." One afternoon, my neighbor Mrs. Langford paused at the fence as I was trimming the hedges. She had that look, the kind where her eyes darted away like she wasn't sure if she should speak. Finally, she said, "I noticed a strange car parked in your driveway yesterday. Didn't look familiar. Thought maybe you had company." I frowned. I hadn't had anyone over. My heart pricked uneasily, but I brushed it off. Maybe it was a delivery driver. Maybe my son had stopped by when I wasn't home. Still, the idea stuck in my chest, heavy as a stone. Later that week, my phone buzzed. A text from my daughter-in-law. No greeting, no warmth, just, "We'll be stopping by this weekend. Don't go anywhere." Her words didn't sound like a request. They sounded like an order. I stared at the glowing screen until the tea in my cup went cold. I remembered the days when my son would scribble me notes with crayon. "Love you, Mom. Be right back." Now, all I got were clipped commands from the woman who called herself his wife. That night, as I locked up the house, I reached for the keys in the ceramic dish by the door. The same dish that had held them for 30 years. My hand froze. The keys weren't there. I searched the counter, the table, even checked my coat pocket twice. Finally, I found them on the hallway sideboard, moved without my knowing. A chill ran down my spine. I lived alone. Nobody had reason to touch them. I picked them up, the metal cold against my palm, and stood in the silence of my hallway. For the first time in all these years, my safe home didn't feel entirely mine anymore. That was the night I realized something inside these walls had shifted. And it wasn't just the furniture. The following weekend, I prepared myself for my son and his wife's visit. I baked an apple pie the way I always did when he was little. The sweet cinnamon smell filled the kitchen, the crust browning just right. And for a moment I let myself believe it might bring back the warmth of family. Maybe he'd take a bite and remember home. Maybe she'd soften. But when the door swung open, my hopes dissolved. My daughter-in-law walked in first, her heels clacking across the wood floor like she owned it. She didn't even glance at the pie cooling on the counter. Instead, she wrinkled her nose. Still using those old curtains, Eleanor? This house could use a modern touch. I blinked at her. No hello, no thank you, just that sharp remark. My son trailed behind, silent as always, his eyes flicking nervously between us. He didn't defend me, didn't even greet me properly, just pressed his lips together as though speaking might stir trouble. She made herself comfortable quickly, plopping down in my husband's old recliner, the very chair no one had sat in since his funeral. I froze, my breath caught in my chest. That chair wasn't just furniture. It was memory, presence, the last mark of the man who had built this home brick by brick. I tried to keep my voice steady. That's his chair. She looked at me over her shoulder, lips curling into something that was more smirk than smile. Well, he's not here anymore, is he? Then she snapped her fingers at my son. Honey, grab my phone from the car. He obeyed instantly, leaving me standing there with her words echoing like a slap. I sat down at the table, hands trembling against the polished wood. The smell of cinnamon suddenly made me sick. I remembered my son at 8 years old running in after school, plopping into that very chair beside his father, swinging his legs and asking, "What's for dinner, Mom?" His laughter had once filled this house like sunlight. Now the air felt heavy, suffocating. When my son returned, he carried her phone in both hands like it was sacred. She didn't thank him, just kept scrolling. I cleared my throat. "I made pie. You used to love it." He glanced at it, then at her, then shrugged. "Maybe later, Mom." The words were soft, but they cut deep. My boy, the one who once devoured every crumb I baked, suddenly acting like pie was a burden. And the worst part? He said it without looking me in the eye. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful like it used to be in this house. It was sharp, jagged. The only sound was the faint hum of the fridge and the tapping of her nails against the phone screen. Finally she rose, walking toward the kitchen cabinets. Without asking, she opened one, shifting my teacups aside to make room for her water bottle. The clink of porcelain against wood made my chest tighten. "Please don't move those," I said quickly, too quickly. "They belong to my mother." She paused, half smiling, and whispered, "Relax, Eleanor. It's not like you need these old things anymore." That sentence, so casual, so dismissive, hit harder than I expected. My throat closed up. I wanted to shout, to slam the cabinet shut, to tell her she had no right. But instead I stood there frozen, my hands gripping the table edge until my knuckles whitened. My son shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. He didn't speak. He didn't defend me. That silence was worse than her words. I wanted to believe it was all small, careless remarks, thoughtless moves. But as I watched her parade around my kitchen like she belonged there, something inside me whispered that this wasn't carelessness. This was intent. That night, when they left, the house didn't feel like it was mine anymore. The smell of cinnamon still lingered, but instead of comfort, it reminded me of rejection. The recliner sat crooked where she had left it. My teacups were out of place, a small but searing violation. And as I sat alone at the table, my son's words, or rather, his silence, replayed in my mind until my heart ached. That was the moment I knew they weren't just careless. They were planning something. A few days later, I returned from a quick trip to the grocery store. The sky was overcast, a thin drizzle tapping against the windshield, and I carried the bags inside like I had done thousands of times before. But the moment I opened my front door, I felt it, a shift. The house smelled different, like someone else's perfume had been sprayed in the air. The faint trace of lavender, sharp and artificial, clung to the curtains. My footsteps echoed strangely, as if the room itself had changed shape. I stepped into the living room and froze. The furniture had been moved. My sofa was pushed against a wall it had never touched in 40 years. The family photographs that once lined the mantel were gone, every single one of them. In their place, a wide empty space stared back at me like a wound. The rocking chair where I used to sit with my son as a baby had been shoved into a corner, half covered with a throw blanket I didn't recognize. For a moment, I thought maybe I was in the wrong house. My heart pounded in my chest. I set the grocery bags down, the apples spilling out and rolling across the floor, and stumbled forward to the empty mantel. I ran my hand along the dustless wood where my wedding photo had always stood. Looking for something, I turned. My daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, a smirk tugging at her lips. She had a ring of keys dangling from her fingers, spinning them carelessly as if they were hers. "Where are my pictures?" I demanded, my voice shaking more than I wanted it to. "Oh, those?" I boxed them up. Thought it was time this place felt younger. Fresher. She walked casually into the room, her heels clicking against the wood. "Don't worry, they're in the garage. For now." For now. The words landed heavy like a warning. My throat tightened. "This is my home. Those are my memories." She tilted her head. "Memories don't pay bills, Eleanor. And honestly, no offense, but this house feels like a museum." My parents agree. "We're just trying to help." Her parents. My stomach nodded. Why would her parents have anything to say about my house? I wanted to shout, to scream, but the words caught in my throat. My son appeared then, standing behind her in the hall. His eyes flickered with something, guilt, hesitation, but he didn't say a word. Not one. He just stared at me, then down at the floor like a boy caught between two worlds. I clutched the edge of the mantel, the wood digging into my palm. Inside my head, questions swirled. Is he part of this? Does he know what she's doing? Is he letting it happen? The room felt colder than the drizzle outside. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered. Her smile sharpened. "Because it's time to move forward. You had your turn. Now it's ours." I thought I might faint. The words blurred, the lavender smell sickened me, and for the first time in my life, I wondered if I was losing my mind. Could it really be happening? Or was I just too old, too blind to see it sooner? My husband's voice from long ago whispered in my memory. "This home will always protect you both." But standing there, I felt no protection. Only invasion. I backed away, gripping the grocery bag handles until the plastic cut into my fingers. My son reached out slightly like he might stop me, but then dropped his hand. He didn't speak. He let her words linger in the air, heavy and unchallenged. I went into the kitchen, but the smell of lavender followed me, clinging to the walls, suffocating the familiar warmth of cinnamon and tea. The house no longer felt like mine. That night, lying awake in my bed, every creak of the house felt foreign. I stared at the ceiling, my chest tight, my thoughts relentless. What if they're planning more? What if this isn't just about rearranging furniture or boxing photos? What if their goal is to erase me completely? I turned toward my husband's empty side of the bed, whispering, "Was I foolish not to see it sooner? Am I losing my boy? And my home?" The silence answered back. For the first time, I realized this wasn't random. This wasn't careless. They had planned this. The next morning, I tried to carry on as if nothing had changed. I brewed my tea, set it beside the cracked photo frame on the table, and tried to hum the hymn my husband used to sing. But the house didn't hum back. It groaned. It sulked. It felt like someone had tampered with its very soul. I wandered into the garage to find the photographs my daughter-in-law claimed she had boxed. She hadn't lied, but the way she stacked those boxes made my stomach turn. My wedding album was shoved beneath a crate of cleaning rags. My son's baby pictures crammed into a bent cardboard flap. Dust clung to the edges, and the air smelled of damp cement and gasoline. I reached for the album, brushing the grit from its cover, and my hands shook. This wasn't carelessness. It was contempt. That evening they arrived again, my son trailing quietly behind his wife. She moved through the kitchen as though it were hers, opening cabinets, pulling out plates without asking. My pie dish sat drying in the rack from earlier in the week, but she pushed it aside to set down her glass. I tried to keep my voice steady. "I'd appreciate it if you asked before moving things." She gave a little laugh, sharp and dismissive. "Eleanor, you don't have to get worked up. Soon enough, all of this will be rearranged anyway." I frowned. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer. Instead, she looked at my son, my boy, and said, "Should we tell her?" My pulse quickened. He shifted his weight, stared at the floor, and muttered, "Maybe not yet." Not yet. The words hit harder than a scream. They carried meaning. Planning. Something unfolding behind closed doors. "Tell me what?" I demanded, my voice trembling. My daughter-in-law smirked. "Don't worry, Eleanor. You'll know soon enough. Just don't make this harder than it needs to be." She left the room then, humming while my son stayed behind, eyes darting anywhere but mine. I stepped closer, the smell of lavender trailing faintly from the living room where she had been. "What is going on?" I asked him softly. He rubbed the back of his neck, the way he used to when he lied about breaking a window as a child. It's nothing, Mom. Just changes. You'll get used to it. Changes. As if my life, my memories, my home were a rug they could simply roll up and toss aside. I felt tears sting my eyes. My voice cracked. This is my house. The one your father built for us. The one I raised you in. For a moment he looked at me, really looked. And I thought I saw guilt flicker there. But then it vanished. He lowered his head. Maybe it's time you accept things are different now. Different. The word carved into me. I couldn't breathe. I turned away, gripping the edge of the counter so tightly the laminate dug into my palm. My chest ached, as though my own son's silence was a knife sliding between my ribs. In that moment I remembered him as a little boy, running home from school with a drawing clutched in his hands. Look, Mom. It's us, you and me. He had drawn us holding hands, smiling under the sun. He had said, I'll always be with you. And now, standing in my kitchen, he couldn't even say, I'm with you. The house felt colder than winter. I wiped my tears quickly, refusing to let them see me crumble. But inside I was breaking. The trust one had poured into my son all his life felt like it was shattering on the tile floor beneath us. They left not long after, her laughter echoing down the hallway, his silence trailing behind her. The slam of the front door rattled the frame. I sat down in the empty kitchen, staring at the untouched pie dish, and pressed my shaking hands against my lap. That night, the house itself seemed to mourn with me. The walls creaked. The pipes moaned. And for the first time I wondered if my son, my only boy, was already lost to me. What would you do if your own child sided with a stranger against you? Would you forgive? Or would you finally fight back? That was the night I knew. My son no longer saw me as his mother. The next morning I couldn't bring myself to touch my tea. The cup sat cooling on the table, the steam fading just like the warmth in this house. My hands kept reaching for it out of habit, but I couldn't drink. My stomach was twisted too tight. I wandered through the hallway trying to anchor myself, and that's when I saw it. My son's old baseball glove, tucked into a shelf in the closet. The leather was cracked, worn soft from years of use. I picked it up, pressing it against my face, breathing in the faint scent of old leather and dust. And just like that, I was somewhere else. I was 34 again, standing at a pawnshop counter. The air smelled of metal and stale cigarettes. I was clutching my grandmother's gold locket, the one she had given me when I married my husband. My fingers shook as I slid it across the counter. The man weighed it without a word, handed me a wad of cash, and I tucked it quickly into my purse. That money paid for my son's baseball camp, the one he begged me to let him join. He had looked up at me with wide eyes and said, Please, Mom, I'll make you proud. And he did. I remembered the day I surprised him at camp, hiding behind the bleachers until his game was over. He ran into my arms, his face smeared with dirt and sweat, clutching that same glove. You came. You always come, he cried. My heart swelled so full it nearly broke. Back then it didn't matter what I gave up, jewelry, sleep, even meals, if it meant he could have more. I worked extra shifts at the diner, scrubbing greasy plates until my hands cracked, so he could wear new cleats instead of hand-me-downs. I told myself, one day he'll understand. One day he'll take care of me the way I took care of him. The flashback faded and I was back in the cold hallway, holding the glove in my trembling hands. Tears blurred my vision. That same boy who once promised to make me proud, who once clung to me with joy, now couldn't even look me in the eye. I set the glove back down gently like it was glass. My knees felt weak, so I sat in the recliner. His father's recliner, the one she had dared to sit in. My body sank into the worn cushions, and for the first time it didn't feel comforting. It felt invaded, tainted. The house seemed to echo with ghosts. My husband's laugh when he carried in boxes of groceries. My son's little feet pounding down the hallway at Christmas. My own voice singing him to sleep. Now those echoes were drowned by her voice, sharp, mocking, entitled. I whispered into the empty room. How did we get here? How did I lose him? The silence gave no answer, only the faint hum of the refrigerator in the distance. Later that day I heard voices outside. I peeked through the curtain and saw them, my son and his wife standing by the car in the driveway. She leaned close to him, whispering, her hand gripping his arm. He nodded reluctantly, and she smiled with satisfaction. I couldn't make out the words, but I didn't need to. The sight alone was enough. She was pulling the strings and he was letting her. The betrayal cut deeper than any words. I sank back into the chair, pressing a hand against my chest. My breaths came shallow, uneven. The weight of it all, the locket I pawned, the nights I stayed awake nursing his fevers, the years of sacrifice, pressed down on me until I could hardly breathe. Was it all for nothing? The glove sat on the shelf, silent witness to my despair. I wiped my tears, realizing those memories belonged to a world that no longer existed. And love, the very thing that once gave me strength, now felt like my greatest weakness. It was a Tuesday evening when they came over again, unannounced, as if the house already belonged to them. The air outside smelled of rain-soaked leaves, but inside the house all I could smell was lavender. Her perfume, sharp and intrusive, clinging to the curtains like a stain. I had set the table for dinner. 3 places. One for me, one for my son, one for her. The empty chair at the head of the table, my husband's chair, remained untouched as it always did. I told myself I wouldn't let her sit there again. We ate in a silence so heavy I could hear the faint tick of the kitchen clock and the scrape of her fork against the plate. My son barely looked up, his shoulders hunched. She, on the other hand, looked perfectly comfortable, cutting her food with a smug grace. Halfway through the meal, she dabbed her lips with a napkin and said almost casually, "You know, Eleanor, it might be smart to get your affairs in order. People your age should really have their wills written down." The fork slipped from my fingers, clattering against the plate. For a moment I couldn't breathe. My son flinched but didn't say anything. He kept his eyes down, stabbing at his food like a boy caught cheating on a test. I swallowed hard. "And why?" I asked slowly. "Are you so interested in my will?" She tilted her head, her smile thin. "I'm only thinking of you. What if something happens suddenly? Wouldn't you want to make sure the right people are taken care of? Your son, his family." Her voice lingered on those last 2 words. His family. As though I weren't family anymore. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping loudly against the floor. My heart was pounding so hard it echoed in my ears. "This is my house," I said firmly. "It always has been. Your father-in-law built it with his own hands. And no one is going to tell me how to handle it." She leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "We're not telling you, Eleanor. We're just guiding you. It's for your own good." The way she said it, smooth and calm, made me feel like a child being scolded, like I was losing my grip on my own life. My son finally spoke, his voice low. "She's just trying to help, Mom." I turned to him, my chest tightening. "Help? Is this what you call help? Letting her speak for you? Letting her decide what happens to this house, to me?" He opened his mouth, then shut it again. His silence was louder than any words could have been. The clock ticked on. My husband's chair sat empty, watching this silent war play out. I thought of the promise he once made to me. "This house will always be your safe place." And the bitter taste of betrayal rose in my throat. I stood slowly, pressing my trembling hands against the table. This is still my house. And my will, when I write it, will be my decision. Not hers. For a moment I thought I saw a flicker of fear cross her face. But then she smirked again, cold and confident. "We'll see, Eleanor. Things are changing whether you like it or not." The words sank deep, heavier than the tick of the clock, heavier than the silence from my son. I gathered the plates, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped them. As I rinsed them under the faucet, the warm water turned lukewarm, then cold, just like everything else in this house. Behind me, I could hear her laughter, soft, triumphant. My son's voice was quiet, barely audible, saying nothing that mattered. I dried my hands and gripped the counter, staring out the kitchen window at the darkening sky. A storm was brewing outside, but it was nothing compared to the storm inside these walls. I looked at my son's face that night, and for the first time I couldn't recognize him. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It streaked down the windows in crooked lines, dripping onto the sill, a steady rhythm that filled the silence of the house. I sat in the recliner with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, staring at the cold cup of tea on the table beside me. I hadn't touched it. My appetite for anything warm or sweet had gone. I thought maybe the storm outside would drown out the storm in my chest. But storms find their way in through walls, through silence, through the words people think you'll never hear. That evening, as I moved quietly down the hallway, I heard voices. My son and his wife were in the living room, their tones low, but the acoustics of this old house carried every syllable straight to me. Her voice first, sharp, confident. "We can get the papers moving faster if your parents move in before Christmas." My heart clenched. Parents. Not me, her parents. Then my son's voice, soft, hesitant. "I don't know if Mom's ready for that." I pressed my back against the wall, my breath caught in my throat. She laughed. A cruel sound that sliced through the steady patter of rain. "Ready? She doesn't need to be ready. She'll have no choice. Once we sell this place, it's done. She can stay in one of those senior condos. It'll be better for everyone. Sell this place." I felt my knees weaken. My own son's voice came again, lower now. "But this is her home. Dad. Dad is gone," she snapped, her voice rising before softening again into a hiss. "And you need to stop living in his shadow. This house is ours now. If she wants to fight it, let her. She doesn't have the strength." Silence stretched, broken only by the rain pounding harder against the glass. Then my son spoke again, barely audible. "Maybe you're right." Those 4 words crushed me more than anything else had. I stumbled back down the hallway before they could see me, my hand gripping the wall for balance. I shut myself in the bedroom, the familiar creak of the door suddenly sounding like a prison lock. My chest rose and fell in shallow, ragged breaths. My son, my boy who once clutched my hand during thunderstorms, who once promised me, "I'll take care of you someday, Mom." He had said maybe she was right. Maybe his wife was right to throw me away. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the quilt I had stitched decades ago. My husband's voice came back to me again, steady and sure. "Ellie, never mistake silence for weakness. Sometimes silence is preparation." For the first time in weeks, I straightened my back. My hands, though trembling, folded in my lap with purpose. The tears dried before they could fall. If they wanted war, they would have it. But not the kind they expected. I rose and went to the closet. On the top shelf, tucked into an old shoebox, lay the envelope I hadn't touched in years. The property deed still in my name, still safe. My fingers brushed over it, and I felt the faintest surge of strength. I whispered to the empty room. "You thought I was weak, but you forgot who raised you. You forgot what I gave up to put you where you are." The rain outside pounded harder, almost as if the house itself was echoing my resolve. I placed the envelope carefully into the drawer of my nightstand and shut it firmly. The click of wood against wood sounded final, decisive. That night, I lay awake not with fear, but with a strange kind of calm. My son's silence had broken something in me, but in the rubble I felt something new rising. Strength. I knew then, they weren't just moving furniture. They weren't just boxing photos. They were erasing me piece by piece. But I wasn't gone yet. Not by a long shot. They thought they'd caged me. But I was already holding the key. The next morning the rain had passed, but the air still smelled of damp earth and wet leaves. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the cracked photo frame on the counter. Inside was my son's graduation picture. Cap crooked, smile wide, his arms slung around my shoulders. I traced the edge of the frame with my finger, and suddenly I wasn't in my kitchen anymore. I was back in a hospital waiting room years ago. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the smell of antiseptic sharp in my nose. My son was 12, lying in a hospital bed after his asthma attack nearly took him from me. I had sat by his side all night, holding his hand, whispering prayers into the sterile air. When the doctor finally said he'd be okay, relief nearly knocked me to the floor. But the bills, oh the bills. I had sold the small farmland my father left me, the last piece of my childhood home, to pay for those treatments. My father's land was gone in an instant, but I told myself it was worth it. Worth it for my son's life, for his future. I remembered his voice, thin and raspy, whispering through the oxygen mask. "When I grow up, Mom, I'll take care of you." The flashback shattered as I blinked back tears. I looked down at the man in the photo, my son at 18, smiling with pride. That promise, it was dust now. Later that day they came again. My daughter-in-law walked in like she owned the place, her perfume trailing behind her, filling the hallway. My son followed, quieter than ever, his eyes darting away from mine. I didn't wait this time. I stood in the living room, the deed envelope heavy in my nightstand upstairs, the memory of my sacrifices burning hot in my chest. "This is my house," I said firmly, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "And I need to hear it from your mouth, not hers. What exactly are you planning?" The silence was deafening. He shifted uncomfortably, rubbing his hands together, avoiding my gaze. "She spoke for him, of course. We've been talking with a realtor. By Christmas, this house will be sold. My parents will move in for a while, and you'll have a nice little condo to yourself. It's cleaner, safer." I cut her off. "Safer? This is my home. The one I built with your husband's father. The one I sacrificed everything for." My voice shook now, but it wasn't weakness, it was fury. "And you want to throw me away like old trash?" Her smile didn't falter. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Eleanor. Think of it as moving forward." I turned to my son, my eyes burning. "And you? Is this what you want?" He finally looked at me. For a brief moment I thought I saw the boy he used to be, the boy who promised to take care of me. But then he lowered his gaze again, his lips barely moving as he said, "Maybe it's for the best, Mom." Those words tore through me like glass. The room spun, the smell of lavender choking me. My knees nearly buckled, but I steadied myself against the table. I wanted to scream, to throw them out, to demand my son remember who I was, what I had done for him. Instead, I stood there, trembling, the silence heavier than any words I could have spoken. My daughter-in-law's eyes glittered with triumph. She took his hand and led him toward the kitchen, as if she had one. But inside something shifted. The pain was unbearable, yes. But beneath the grief, beneath the humiliation, a fire was building. "Tell me, if the child you gave everything for turned his back on you, would you forgive him or would you finally walk away?" As the front door closed behind them, the house was silent again. I sank into the recliner, tears sliding down my cheeks, my chest heaving with quiet sobs. But as I stared at the empty chair across from me, my husband's chair, my tears slowed. They thought they had broken me. But I knew then, deep down, that they had only awakened me. That day I realized if I wanted to survive, I would have to stop being their mother and start being their opponent. That night, the house was unbearably quiet. No hum of conversation, no laughter, no warmth. Just silence, thick and pressing, broken only by the occasional creak of the old beams in the ceiling. I sat at the kitchen table, a single lamp casting a yellow glow over the wood grain. My hands rested on the surface, palms flat, as if holding myself steady. In front of me sat a cup of tea, untouched. The steam had long since disappeared. I stared at it for what felt like hours. My heart was pounding not from fear anymore, but from something else, something sharper, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Resolve. I kept hearing his words. "Maybe it's for the best, Mom." My son's voice, small and weak, siding with her. Those words rang louder than any insult, heavier than any silence. They told me everything I needed to know. I could not count on him anymore. At first, the grief threatened to consume me. The weight of years of sacrifice, selling my father's land, pawning my locket, working long nights while my body ached, all so he could have a better life. And this was my return. Betrayal wrapped in silence. But then beneath that grief came something else. Anger. Not the wild kind, not the kind that screamed or threw things. No. Mine was colder. Quieter. The kind that waited, watched, and remembered. I rose from the chair, my knees stiff, and walked to the study. The room smelled faintly of dust and cedar from the old bookshelves. I opened the drawer of my desk, the same drawer where my husband once kept his ledgers, and pulled out the shoebox. Inside lay the deed, yellowed with age but still intact, still mine. My fingers traced the signature, his and mine together. The ink faded but binding. My husband had always told me, "Ellie, protect this. This house is your shield." I closed my eyes and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. In that silence, a thought rose clear as a bell. I am not done. They thought they had stripped me of my strength, that they could shove me aside like an old chair and move their plans forward without resistance. But they had forgotten who I was. They had forgotten the woman who stayed up nights sewing costumes when we couldn't afford them, the woman who held a sick child until dawn and still went to work in the morning, the woman who buried her husband and kept this house alive alone for 15 years. I whispered into the dimly lit study, "You think I'm weak because I'm quiet. But silence isn't weakness. It's preparation." The word steadied me. I tucked the deed back into the drawer, closed it carefully, and locked it. Then I stood straighter than I had in weeks. My shoulders lifted, my breath deepened. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt taller than my age. I knew then what I had to do. Not to beg, not to plead, not to fight them on their terms. No, I would fight them on mine. The storm outside had cleared, but a storm was gathering inside me. And it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be quiet, precise, and devastating. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the quilt pulled tight around me. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. Instead I planned. They thought I had no strength left. But in truth I was only just beginning to find it again. For the first time I wasn't afraid of losing them. I was ready to lose them to save myself. The next morning I woke before dawn. The sky outside was still dark, the street lamps casting long shadows across the wet pavement. For the first time in weeks I didn't wake with dread. I woke with purpose. I brewed tea more out of ritual than thirst, and let the steam rise against my face. The scent of chamomile steadied me, reminding me that small comforts still belonged to me. Then I sat down at the kitchen table and took out a pen and notebook. My handwriting shook at first, but as the ink flowed so did my thoughts. Names. Numbers. Memories of where the important papers were tucked away. The deed, the insurance, the old savings bonds. All still mine. All still safe. By mid-morning I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a familiar voice answered. Ellie. His tone carried both surprise and warmth. It was Richard, my husband's old friend, now a retired attorney who still handled a few cases here and there. Richard. I whispered, my voice low even though I was alone. I think it's time I ask for your help. There was a pause on the other end, then a steady reply. Tell me everything. I did. Not all at once, but enough for him to understand. About the furniture moved, the photographs boxed, the whispers about selling my home. He didn't interrupt, didn't rush me. Just listened the way people rarely do anymore. When I finished, he said firmly, Ellie, don't you worry. If the deed's still in your name, no one can sell that house without you. And if they're trying to force your hand, we'll make sure they regret it. The strength in his voice seeped into me like sunlight. We agreed to meet quietly the next day at the little diner off Maple Street, the one with the red vinyl booths and coffee that always tasted burnt. Nobody would think twice about seeing two old friends having breakfast there. After I hung up, I felt lighter. I moved through the house with a steady calm, gathering what I needed. The deed from the drawer, the insurance folder, old letters from the bank. I placed them in a worn leather satchel my husband once used for work. That evening they came over again. My daughter-in-law breezed into the kitchen, her perfume as suffocating as ever. My son trailed behind, his eyes avoiding mine. I served dinner, setting their plates in front of them with steady hands. My movements were calm, deliberate. Inside, though, I was miles ahead of them. She chattered on about her parents' plans for the holidays, about how things will look different soon. Every word was meant to needle me, but I just smiled faintly, nodding at the right times. I let her believe she had one. All the while, my mind was on the satchel upstairs, on the papers tucked safely inside, on the quiet meeting plan for tomorrow. When dinner ended, she rose from the table, smirking at me as she gathered her things. Thanks for the meal, Eleanor. You're really making this transition easier than I thought. Transition. The word burned, but I didn't flinch. Anything for family, I said smoothly, my voice so calm it startled even me. She left looking satisfied. My son glanced at me once before following her out. That single glance held something, hesitation, maybe even guilt, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. I touched the edge of the table, steadying myself. I had played my part. Quiet, obedient, defeated. The mask was in place. But beneath it, I was sharpening my blade. The trap was nearly ready, and soon they would walk right into it without ever seeing it coming. The next morning, I dressed with more care than usual. A pressed blouse, pearl earrings, the soft gray shawl my husband once gave me on our anniversary. It wasn't vanity, it was armor. When I looked at myself in the mirror, I whispered, "Today we remind them who this house belongs to." At 9 sharp, I walked into the little diner on Maple Street. The bell above the door jingled, and the smell of frying bacon and burnt coffee hit me instantly. Richard was already waiting in a corner booth, his thick glasses perched on the end of his nose. He rose when he saw me, his handshake firm, steady, familiar. We ordered coffee, neither of us touching it. I slid the satchel across the table. He opened it carefully, scanning the deed, the insurance papers, the accounts I had quietly maintained over the years. He gave a low whistle. "You've got more power here than they realize, Ellie." His words steadied my heart. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I'll draft the papers. Quietly. If they think they're selling this house out from under you, let them. By the time they find out, you'll already have the upper hand. I'll make sure of it." When I left that diner, the drizzle outside had turned into sunlight. For the first time in months, my steps felt light. That weekend, my son and his wife invited her parents over. I hadn't been asked, only informed. By the time they arrived, my dining table had been set without my permission, my good silverware laid out as though I were a guest in my own home. Her parents sat smugly at the head of the table, laughing too loud, speaking too freely. My daughter-in-law moved about like a queen in her castle, while my son hovered quietly at her side. I sat in the corner observing, silent, watching. At one point, her mother glanced at me and said, "Well, this place will be much livelier once we're here permanently. You'll enjoy the company, Eleanor. Seniors shouldn't live alone, you know." The words dripped with false sweetness, but the sting was real. I sipped my tea, cold again of course, and gave no answer. Later, while they laughed in the living room, she pulled me aside in the hallway. Her voice was low, smug. "Richard called. He's drafting new paperwork for you, isn't he?" My heart lurched, but my face stayed still. "What do you know about Richard?" She smirked. "Oh, I have my ways. And it doesn't matter what you're planning, Eleanor. This house is ours. You're just delaying the inevitable." I stared at her, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Then softly I said, "Real family doesn't lock each other in garages. Real family doesn't erase memories. Real family doesn't take what isn't theirs." For the first time I saw a flicker of unease in her eyes. Just a flicker, but it was enough. Dinner that night was strained. My son barely touched his plate. Her parents prattled on, but I barely heard them. My mind was already miles ahead. When they finally left, I walked through the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs I had rescued from the garage. The house hummed again, faint but steady, as though it knew I was fighting for it. I whispered into the quiet, "I may lose them, but I won't lose myself. Not anymore." And as their laughter faded down the driveway, I smiled for the first time in months, because the real storm was only beginning. They came again the following Sunday. I knew they would. By then, the house had grown heavy with a kind of tense anticipation, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I had spent the morning dusting the mantel, setting out the photo frame with my son's graduation picture, and brewing a fresh pot of tea. Every move I made was deliberate. At 3 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. This time they didn't arrive alone. My daughter-in-law's parents followed close behind, carrying papers and speaking loudly, as though they already owned the place. My son walked in last, shoulders slumped, eyes darting toward me with that same silent guilt I had grown so tired of. I stepped aside and let them in. "One last visit," I murmured under my breath, though none of them heard. We sat in the living room. My daughter-in-law spread a stack of papers across the coffee table. Documents I hadn't seen, filled with bold signatures and highlighted lines. She looked at me with a glittering smile. "It's almost official now. The house transfer will be done by the end of the week." Her parents nodded approvingly. One of them even had the gall to pat my hand. "Don't worry, Eleanor. You'll be comfortable in a senior condo. Think of it as a fresh start." My son said nothing. He stared at the floor, his hands folded, his silence screaming louder than words. I let the moment linger, my fingers wrapped calmly around my teacup. Then I set it down with a soft click that cut through the noise of their chatter. "Actually," I said, my voice even steady, "the transfer won't be happening." They all froze. My daughter-in-law blinked, then laughed sharply. "What are you talking about? Of course it is. The papers are here. The realtor's ready." "You've been misled?" I interrupted, sliding a manila envelope from the side table. Richard had delivered it to me just yesterday, and now it was time to let it speak. This deed is still in my name. Every legal right belongs to me. And as of 2 days ago, the house has already been secured under a trust. A trust you cannot touch. The room went silent. Even the ticking clock seemed to pause. Her face drained of color. That's not possible. I looked her straight in the eye. It's not only possible. It's done. She turned to my son, desperate. Tell her she can't do this. But he only lowered his head further, shame covering him like a shroud. Her parents shifted uneasily, their arrogance slipping. This is outrageous, her father muttered. We had an understanding. You had nothing, I said softly but firmly. You were guests in my home, nothing more. And now you're not even that. My daughter-in-law's voice rose shrill, cracking under the weight of panic. You can't do this to me. To us. We deserve this. I stood slowly, my shawl slipping from my shoulders, my back straighter than it had been in years. No. What you deserve is the truth. I glanced at my son, and my voice softened. And so do you. He finally met my eyes, and I saw it there, regret heavy and raw. His lips trembled, but no words came. I took a deep breath. This house was built with love. You tried to steal it with greed. And greed never wins. The silence that followed was sharp, final. Her parents rose awkwardly, muttering excuses, heading toward the door. She lingered a moment longer, her face twisted with rage and fear, before storming out after them. My son stayed seated, unable to move. I looked down at the papers still scattered across my table, symbols of their arrogance now reduced to worthless ink. Tell me, is respect worth more than money? Or is family worth keeping? Even when it wounds you. I gathered the papers calmly, stacked them neatly, and slid them into the trash bin. Then I poured myself another cup of tea, steam curling gently into the air. For the first time in months I tasted it warm. They had tried to erase me, but all they erased was themselves. The house was quiet again. Not the suffocating silence that had haunted me for weeks, but a gentle, steady calm. The kind of silence that feels like peace. The kind that breathes with you instead of against you. Her parents never came back. I heard from a neighbor that they left town quickly, embarrassed and muttering excuses about bad timing. My daughter-in-law, furious and humiliated, stopped speaking to me altogether. Her absence was a blessing more than a punishment. And my son, he still visits, though not as often. When he does, he sits at the kitchen table with his hands folded, eyes low, as if the weight of his silence still presses down on him. Once he tried to apologize. The words trembled on his lips but never quite formed. I didn't press him. Some debts can't be repaid with words alone. The truth is, I don't know if I'll ever forgive him. A mother's heart can crack and still keep beating, but the scars remain. Still, he is my child, and the door, though scarred, isn't locked. One evening, after all of it had settled, I sat in the garden with a cup of warm tea cradled between my hands. The roses swayed in the evening breeze, their fragrance carrying me back to simpler times. The chair beside me sat empty, my husband's chair, the one that had always stayed waiting. I looked at it and whispered, "We made it through love. The house is safe." Inside, I had placed the cracked photo frame back on the mantel, right where it belonged. The glass was still fractured, but I left it that way. It reminded me that even broken things can hold beauty, that even shattered glass can still catch the light. Life feels different now. Not easier, not lighter, just different. I no longer live with the illusion that family always means loyalty. Instead, I live with the truth that dignity, once reclaimed, is stronger than any betrayal. The house hums again when I walk through its rooms. The walls no longer feel invaded. They feel like mine. Like Marjorie's house. Yes, that's what the neighbors now call it again. After whispers had spread about what happened here. Did you hear what Marjorie did? Sold it right out from under them. Some tell it with shock, others with pride, but all of them know the story. Even the lawyer said he'd never seen a move this bold. I don't gloat, though. That isn't who I am. I didn't win by shouting or by fighting in the open. I won by remembering who I was, by holding on to what my husband and I built together, by refusing to be erased. Now, when the evenings grow cool, I sit at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of tea. The clock ticks softly. The empty chair sits across from me, still waiting, still watching. And I feel peace. Because in losing them, the respect I thought was mine, the son I thought I knew, I found myself again. I found my strength, my dignity, my voice. I didn't just save my house. I saved myself.